Hey, it's Soul with another video, and today I'm going to talk about a very special thing that I unlocked just today during stream. It was the Mag'har Orc Allied Race Unlock Scenario Event Thingamajigger. Obviously, that meant I hit Exalted Reputation with the Honor Bound, legitimately. I do find it kind of curious that certain players were able to unlock this scenario much earlier than normal. I thought I worked really hard at it, and well, that's, I guess, is beside the point. The reason why I'm talking about this today is because this event scenario thing is so deep and lore-rich and multi-layered that this is going to have possibly very wide-ranging repercussions with the future of the World of Warcraft and the Warcraft franchise itself if Blizzard decides to take advantage of it. I'm going to carry on about this for a while, and behind me is going to be some snippets of what I'm talking about. So strap in, folks, because there is a lot going on, and I can't wait for you to take this ride with me. Let's go. So once you're exalted with the honor bound, apparently Eitrigg finds it to be a really good idea to be like, hey, let's go ahead and go somewhere and go travel through time and get the old Mag'har Orcs, because that sounds like a really good idea. I do find it kind of interesting that this is the idea that Eitrigg and I guess the Horde thought of. Like, no, let's not get indigenous creatures to this planet. Let's get orcs from another dimension. Brilliant. And the Horde makes it seem pretty easy. They just go right down to the Caverns of Time, talk to a dragon, and he's like, yeah, sure, I was expecting you. Let's do this. Funny with the Bronze Dragons that they expected something like this. I mean, they expect everything. They are basically omniscient in, as far as omniscience goes in WoW. They know what's going to happen, and apparently whatever is going on or whatever is about to go on in the future, this is probably the best timeline. Like, this is really the best timeline. They make an interesting reference to Garrosh Hellscream, at least the one that we fight at the end of Siege of Orgrimmar. We fight him again in this scenario, but not before the Bronze Dragons make the reference that this particular Garrosh is one of the bad ones, that for the most part, Garrosh Hellscream is a celebrated hero, an awesome guy, a great dude. And it made me think, like, typically with these time-traveling, alternate dimension kinds of tropes, that there's a certain kind of balance. So in a world where Garrosh Hellscream is like the super cool guy, what is the thing that offsets it? Maybe it's a bad thrall that did turn out to be influenced heavily by Adelis Blackmore. Maybe closely related to that, what's her name, Taretha. Instead of her being blind and a nice girl, maybe she's like just some bad bitch, just waiting to start mess. And again, I find it interesting that these Bronze Dragons just know it all. They know that, oh, okay, this version of Garrosh, not really one of the good ones. We've seen better. But moving on, let's fast forward and get right back to Draenor. Sorry, you're back. Now, Draenor is markedly different from what it was before. Now, we're in Gorgrond. All this scenario stuff takes place over in Gorgrond, but you'll notice that there's kind of a shade of brown over everything, as if it wasn't brown enough already. The whole jungle part of it has been largely washed away. The landscape has changed greatly, and if you can get over the PTSD and recall what had happened before and what we're seeing now, the lush jungle that we used to see is no longer there. The water, most of it's dried up. That cool little ogre base where there was like little fighting tournaments going on, that's largely been wiped out. We champions of Azeroth left the world of Draenor liberated, for the most part, from the demons, and it's reflected in some of the text here that shortly after Archimonde's defeat, the Draenei and the Mag'har, or I guess the orcs back then, they routed the rest of the demons and killed everything off. This particular version of Draenor is kind of like a biodome, a big what-if scenario, and this is what we're seeing. And the what-if that I'm talking about here is, well, they describe it themselves, what if there's nothing left to fight? Now keep in mind that we're looking at this from a Horde perspective. There is no alliance equivalent of going back to Draenor and trying to figure out what's going on with the Draenei. Right now we're seeing this from an orc perspective, and according to the orcs, they're trying to eke out their existence, but at the same time, they are sitting on a dying world, and in their perspective, it is thanks to the Draenei that are drying everything out because somehow the light's doing it. Maybe this is true. Maybe it's not. Maybe this is one of those two sides of the same coin sort of thing, and we have yet to see what's going on the other side. At least as we're seeing it here, talking to some of these orcs and going around the camp, I see no evidence of some sort of, water-drying, world-destroying thing that's going on. Maybe it's happening elsewhere. Maybe it's not. Maybe it is the Draenei. Shortly into this scenario, we meet some familiar characters, including who is now very old Grommash Hellscream. Lantras of the Blade is there too, who ironically is using a mining pick. A minor bit of trivia, for those of you who had played through Warlords of Draenor, Lantras of the Blade is one of the first followers that you get who has the ability to enhance your mind. So a lot of the time you kind of sent him to the mind, and sometimes you left him there forever. So we meet Geya'rah, and I'm sorry for the pronunciation throughout this video. She's the daughter of Durotan and Draka, the, alternate dimension equivalent of Thrall. And I'm going to talk about her a lot more, but I'll at least say right now that she has a really strong and fiery spirit. She really embodies that orc pride for the Horde, that sort of energy. The Horde, as in you the champion and Eitrig, are trying to impress Grommash Hellscream by, just displaying a bit of prowess with helping him out a little bit. You're sent to that ogre camp that I mentioned earlier to help put down a little bit of resistance. And we find out just a teeny bit more of what's going on between the Mag'har Orcs and the Draenei, because it turns out that these ogres are betraying the orcs, teaming up with the Draenei to make sure that they're the ones that are surviving at the end of this war. Regardless of who is actually at fault, Draenor is in fact dying. Like I said, the place is drying out. Fewer trees, fewer green, fewer animals. Remember that long before this, Draenor was a place that was so full of spirit energy that the plant life was getting out of control. And now look at the place. Not looking so hot. Going back to what I was saying earlier and the beef between the Mag'har and the Draenei, they explain just what it is that's got this whole conflict started anyway. That after the demons were all killed, there was nothing left to fight. Historically in Warcraft, it typically turned out to be the orcs that became the aggressors. When there was nothing left to fight, they would end up fighting each other, or they would start fighting, whatever race was around them. And in this case, it was in fact the Draenei. This time, though, the tables have turned. It at least appears that the Draenei have become kind of fanatic, zealots. They may think that they're in the right, but they've also lost control of themselves. This answers another one of the big what-ifs in this scenario. What if Velen isn't around? For those of you who have played Warlords of Draenor, the version of Velen that existed here ended up dying very early on. It was another Draenei named Yrel who eventually obtained the title of High Exarch, or otherwise the leader of the Draenei. By comparison though, she's young and I would say untested as a leader. Velen has historically been able to instill a bit of calm in part of everybody around him, including the Draenei. So without someone like Velen, over the course of 30 years, which is the time frame between the end of Warlords of Draenor and what we're seeing here, behind me, this very well could be what we get. But we don't entirely know where this influence comes from. The Mag'har say that it comes from the Naaru maybe convincing them or otherwise poisoning their minds, and there is in fact a Naaru present in this scenario. We also get a small glance of what the Naaru and what the light is capable of as we're helping out some orcs to the south. The orcs over there aren't just stunned, they are frozen. They have applied to them an ability called Blessing of Eternity, which the tooltip says they're frozen in time. This alludes to a vision that Alleria Windrunner saw in the 1,000 Years of War audio drama, where she saw visions of frozen worlds encased in crystal. It's quite possible that, again, this is a sample of what's to come if the light is left unchecked. I put a lot of focus on the Mag'har and the Draenei in this scenario because obviously it's about these two races. Jumping into this scenario is not a Horde and Alliance story, necessarily. It also isn't entirely a story based on just the light, although there is a lot to speculate from that, like I've been talking about. But what this scenario is one of, or maybe the last story of this version of Draenor. And the story doesn't end well. The world is dying, two dominant races are fighting for control. One of them, in this case the Mag'har Orcs, is presumably losing, and it really doesn't look like the Draenei are going to really come out on top, or at least they're going to be ruling over a dead world. Sound familiar? Maybe. This could be a foreshadow of what happens on Azeroth if we're left to be in this constant state of war. War is ravaging both of these planets, but the difference between these two is that one of them happens to be a Titan too, and this could have a really big impact. So we say goodbye once again to Draenor with a couple of takeaways. One is that without appropriate balance to keep things in check, the light can get pretty crazy. By contrast, Azeroth is not running low on conflicts. It's already addled with all sorts of problems, so it doesn't really give the light or the forces of the light that much room to move. We get a glimpse of another dystopian world. We've already seen tragedy in Outland after the Second War. Poor Draenor, now we get to see another messed up version of it because of different circumstances. The last takeaway is the reason why we're even there in the first place. Mag'har Orcs. They're part of the Horde now. And the way I see it, the inclusion of the Mag'har Orcs as an allied race is going to shake things up even greater than the first round of allied races that have come in. Reason being is that they're orcs. I want to bring your attention now over to Geya'rah, the overlord of the Mag'har Orcs and basically its faction leader. Like I said earlier, she is the daughter of Draka and Duratan, and she is full of fire. She talks, walks, fights, 100% orc all the way. Personality-wise, she's kind of like your own what-if scenario. What if Thrall was raised just by orcs and not by humans? Geya'rah is what you get. And I've got to wonder what this means politically within the leadership structure of the Horde, because right now the leadership structure is a little bit in flux. The Mag'har Orcs landed at the gates of Orgrimmar quite literally with the clothes on their back and the weapons in hand. They were in the middle of a battle when they just got whisked away. So they've got nothing, let alone information. Geya'rah had to introduce herself to the current war chief, Sylvanas Windrunner, and she pledged her loyalty. It's not something that she takes lightly, she says. Sylvanas asks Geya'rah, how much do you value honor? And Geya'rah's like, hell yeah, I'm all about it. So I'm wondering how Sylvanas feels about that. So I think Geya'rah has the potential to make a very, very big splash early on if Blizzard decides to play her card. And by that I mean because she has such a strong personality that it is easy for her to kind of sort of act like Garrosh Hellscream, as in, hey, this isn't the Horde way, this isn't what I was taught, or I wasn't told stories about these with, you know, your Thrall and your Vol'jin and what have you. So I'm going to speculate what the possible Mag'har Orc influence could be on the Horde and on Azeroth and the Warcraft franchise itself. I have a pretty good feeling that Geya'rah is going to eventually be propped up to be the new Orc racial leader to actually replace Saurfang. I'm very curious as to what the interactions between those two characters are going to have. As we all very much know, Saurfang has a very, very strong sense of honor. We don't know Geya'rah very well, but one thing that we do know about her and the Mag'har Orcs in general is that they absolutely hate the Draenei. They don't care if these Draenei are different. To them, they're all the same. A race that is susceptible to power, whether it's fel, whether it's darkness, whether it's light. So I think that if Geya'rah and Saurfang meet, that there could be lessons learned from each other. Although I'm a bit less convinced that there's going to be a great interaction between Geya'rah and Thrall, or Goel, or Green Jesus, whatever the heck you want to call him. I can easily see friction between Thrall and Geya'rah. I mean, Geya'rah sees Thrall as not someone who was raised by orcs, by her actual parents. They were raised by humans. As in, they may share the same parents, but they obviously don't share the same upbringing. I actually think that Geya'rah can be one of the influences that really sparks off the conflict between Light and Void because of her strong affinity against the Draenei and the Naaru probably, and the very fundamental forces of the light. Then again, the Mag'har Orcs can roll as priests, so I'm pretty sure that she doesn't outright dismiss the light, just that it's influenced like anything else, like the void, like the fel, like the arcane, how it can have a negative influence on the body and mind and soul. So that's about everything that I wanted to say. There's just a lot to unpack from this scenario. Like I said, there's tons of lore that comes out of it, lots of possibilities and things that can branch out, again, if Blizzard decides to take advantage of it. These are things that Blizzard can revisit at really any point in time when it's like, okay, it's time to do some Void Light stuff. Let's bring back the Mag'har, let's reintroduce their storyline and really get the ball rolling. They can have a big Horde leadership shakeup because Geya'rah is right there at the top. There's the possible interactions and friction between her and Sylvanas and Saurfang and maybe Thrall like somewhere on the side. But enough of me gushing over this. What do you folks at home and on the toilet think? Does this scenario even matter? Is this just another bit of shock value to impress us briefly, and will Blizzard just forget about it? I'd love to hear your thoughts in a comment below. I hope you enjoyed this ramble fest of mine, and if you did, please like the video somewhere over there. Please subscribe to support the channel and keep it alive so I can keep giving you more of this. and all things Warcraft. I'll see you next time. Until then, stay safe, stay happy, and stay breezy.